welcome back, everyone, to the Playful Horizons speaker series. This is a series Kenzie and I started last term, and we're keeping it going. We are bringing in emerging rock stars from across the world of game media studies and design broadly. We've had one session so far this semester. We'll have more as time goes on. I think we have 6, 7 more coming up at some point this term. As always, the first half of our session today will be recorded. Those recordings will go up on the Faculty of Arts YouTube page this summer, probably in about May, but raw recordings will be made available to students. And our next speaker after today, we're going to be talking with Hibby Thack, who is a transmedia studies scholar who focuses specifically on VTubers and excuse me, and PNG tubers. And we will be talking with her on Thursday, March 20th. So without further ado, I think I'm going to hand things over to Kenzie, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Perfect. Thank you so much, PB. So today we are very excited to be talking with Elliot Bear Yu, who is a multi-mixed media artist, PhD dropout, and all-around cool guy. He's passionate about all forms of experimentation, from pushing the edge of traditional scholarship to trying and usually failing to work in new mediums. So welcome, Elliot. We're so excited to have you. And maybe to start things off, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your academic background and what got you into studying games?
Yeah, so I actually got my start in undergrad doing philosophy and not really enjoying it, but finishing an undergraduate degree in it. And sort of in my last year of undergrad, I ended up just kind of taking like random classes, and one of them was a games class. And I had been working as a freelance artist and really struggling to, I guess, combine what I did as work with what I did in what I studied. I worked with a lot of kind of like very formal academics who did mostly history and analytical philosophy, and they weren't really doing new media stuff. So there was always this really big divide. But this games class kind of gave me an opportunity to do a lot of like the work that I did and the hobbies that I had, and think of those as scholarly practices. Around that time, I'd been an undergraduate Mellon Fellow, which is a program that kind of helps. The idea is to get marginalized undergraduate students into PhD programs to change kind of the current professoriate to be more diverse. So I was in this program as a philosophy student, thinking I would go into PhD programs for philosophy. I kind of fell in love with games, and the pandemic happened. I took a year off just to work as like an English tutor in LA, and decided to reapply to PhDs because I had been in this program where that's kind of what I expected the next 5 or so years of my life to look like, but changed to look at new media programs. Fortunately, got in to ones that I wanted. I went from UCLA doing philosophy to UCI in their visual studies program, which was a joint program between art history and film and media studies that would later get divorced and turn into 2 separate departments.
I was going to say, there's some drama there.
Yeah, it was a big deal when it happened. But so part of when I was there, I really treated the PhD as a research degree. And what I wanted to do was research. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do really practical kinds of research. So I was working in games and media, and a big amount of the people I worked with, colleagues, didn't use the programs they wrote about. They didn't use game engines. They didn't use 3D modeling software. Their stance on how they approached those things analytically was just different. And I really felt like what I wanted to do with what I was studying was understand it more intimately from the perspective of practitioners. And I had been a practitioner I'd been, graphic designer and an illustrator, and I'd worked on, game stuff before. So it made the most sense to me. So I really started pushing for this hybrid practice in academia that people really liked, but no, the problem was that everybody I was like, I really want to do creatively informed research. They're like, that's awesome. We want to prove it, but like, that's really cool. So I had a lot of like failed manuscripts, failed projects about, sort of, my big one was, when you're a PhD student, you have an MA requirement, typically a master's requirement if you don't already have one. And the idea I had with, I was working with Bo Ruberg and Braxton Soderman at the time was, we'll pitch something a little crazy for the MA. So when we get to the dissertation, they'll be like, well, we already said yes to the other one. So I was working on this project about the 3D modeling software Blender, and I was really interested in the way that everywhere from major games conferences to media conferences to even places like SIGGRAPH, more tech side, almost all 3D modeling software was displayed in presentations that were screenshots or written descriptions. And I really felt like there was stuff missing from that, and that it hindered our ability to talk about games because these were exported 3D models. We were never really getting to look at those draft portions in 3D modeling programs. So I pitched this idea that was a 3D model. It was a Blender file about 3D modeling that required users to download Blender and open the project in Blender in order to read any of the stuff I was writing about or see any of the examples, and kind of had to, at base level, figure out how the program worked in order to see the program at all. My cat's yelling at me. Hello. And he's a former stray and he bites me if he gets too close, so I'm a little nervous. But so I had this big project about doing this work that really would force people to engage in some aspect of practitioners' mindsets. And we pitched it, and it was pretty harshly rejected. They pretty much just said, like, this is cool, but if it can't be filed, it's not going to be the MA project. And we talked circles around it a lot and tried to figure out what to do, and it ended up coming down to, like, this is not a piece of paper. This is not a traditional project. There is no metric for which we can grade this, so there is no project here. And if there's no project for the MA, there's no project for the dissertation either. So what happened was, I spoke to a lot of people who were like, well, if you want to make things, you should just do an MFA. And I really saw what I was doing as research, and that was what was really frustrating. Was people were like, well, if you do the PhD, it's because you want to write. It's because you want to write and add to theory. And I want to add to theory, but the PhD has always been sold as a research degree to me, not as a writing degree. But I made the decision to, look at other options. I realized, don't step on the keyboard. Come on, dude. He's like right under the camera too.
Oh, baby.
And just looking at me. So I kind of realized, I was like, well, I could stay in a PhD and I could write articles and I would probably be fine at it. But I was really worried that if I had left with a very formal dissertation, I might not know. There's this thing that, and maybe PB and Kenzie may know, as people further along in their careers, you talk to a lot of older academics, professors, who will tell you that, they've got all these projects that were shelved. They were shelved to get the job. And then once they got the job, they were shelved to get tenure. And now you're working on a project that's 10, 15 years old, and you don't know if you can do it anymore. And I'd had a good friend and colleague of mine, who I won't say who it is because I don't know if he wants that public, but who, talked a lot about how he had this project that he loved that didn't work as a dissertation. So he did something else, and now he is just gotten 10 years along into his career, picking that project up again and finding it a little difficult. And I didn't know if I wanted to have to wait 15 years to express these ideas, and I was worried that in 15 years I may not even think to do projects like this anymore. I would think to make articles or go to conferences, which is not a bad thing. It's just not really what I wanted. So I actually applied only to one MFA, UCLA's DMA program, because I'd been an undergrad there, and I'd worked with one person there but had never touched it as an undergrad. I loved living in LA, and I treated it as sort of a, don't knock my glass of water over, dude. I treated it as sort of a cosmic, look, I have to put a measuring cup on this so he can't get into it. But I sort of treated it as like this cosmic test. I was like, if I apply to one MFA and I get in, it's the universe telling me I should pursue design a little. And if I don't, I still have the PhD, and I'll work on that. And the PhD is kind of like 5 or so years of a free job that doesn't pay you very much, but stop. It doesn't pay you very much, but it's kind of like a sweet deal if you like to read and be a student. So I did it. I got in. I got sort of enough money to justify a move, and then got here and realized it wasn't that much money. And now I've sort of working on my MFA, coming from thinking I would be a PhD, coming from an undergrad in philosophy, but not the cool philosophy, like very formal analytic philosophy.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing your background with us, Elliot. And I think for our students in particular, this is really valuable because, this is something we talk about in the classroom a lot. And for those of my students who do ask me questions about graduate school, I mean, this is one of those things where the kinds of work that people will encourage is one thing and get excited about. But for those who choose to pursue creative projects in a program that isn't arts-based, will often find themselves having to work against the grain so often that it can be really challenging. And likewise, working in art spaces is hard because sometimes you want to be able to have conversations that are really rooted in theory and research. And those spaces come with their own specific challenges. Well, this actually leads us perfectly into the next question that we kind of had, which is really about how you kind of navigate, and I guess sort of move between the different academic spaces that you occupy. So we know you work across a number of mediums: animation, games, sculpting, glitch art. How do you approach your projects? What guides you as you move between mediums? And for context, because our game certificate program is so interdisciplinary, we have students come from all kinds of creative backgrounds: music, art, computer science, and yes, even the occasional philosopher. And so I'm curious how you approach this now as someone who does work so interdisciplinarily, and also someone who, like myself, I think has been in a lot of conference presentations and things with game scholars and people who have never made a game in their life. Thoughts on this?
I just I guess leading into this, for those who may or may not be familiar, we have a big conference in games called DIGRA. It's a digital something, I don't remember all the letters, but every year they request a lot of things. They want to see perspectives from practitioners. Previously I'd been working in an academic kind of program, and now in a more creative program I got to see for the first time tons of my colleagues submit proposals that get rejected on the basis that they're not grounded in the theory that institutions like DIGRA wants. But the problem is that if you are a practitioner and that is your job and that is your way of looking through these games, you will never have the theoretical background a PhD, is proposing in their research, because you're interested in this other thing. So that's been interesting because, I've been learning all these tricks that's pretty much like front loading the phrase that you're a practitioner, which in a weird way is basically like telling, the interpretation is like, oh, you're a practitioner, so you're maybe not like thinking. It's okay. But then you can get in, these weird little projects. But when you look at these reviews, a lot of people will be like, well, it's a little weird, but they're a practitioner. So on the one hand, it's like, that's so rude. And on the other hand, it's like, well, the conference paper got in. So it's this weird kind of back and forth where, you're all working in these fields together, pulling at different strings and trying to get on the same page. But, kind of the main difference is that, when you're coming with all these different backgrounds and these different lenses of looking at things, when it comes to at the base level of academia, like the bread and butter is often reviewers. You are at the mercy of who reviews your work. And some people in our field are very traditional. They don't want to see things that don't look like traditional research, even if the work they look at and study is experimental. I've gotten a few notes about that, about how just because I'm studying experimental media doesn't mean I should do it in an experimental way. Some people are very, very clear about what they want. And then moving more onto the I guess medium side of things, I think it's something that is a little looked down upon, not looked down upon, but I think when you're an academic, you're often asked to be a specialist. You teach the general classes, but then what's your dissertation about? What are you adding to the field? And even in your first few years, when you're doing all the base classes and you're learning, even when you're an undergrad, there's still this idea that you're trying to figure out what your focus is, what is your path through to the medium. And that's something that I think in the arts world is stressed much less heavily in those earlier stages. A lot of it is about picking up programs you've never learned and trying to figure out, is this something you add to your practice or not? And there are aspects of that in academia on the... God, he's running around chasing his tail. There are aspects of that in academia on like the theory side where you're being introduced to like newer or contemporary people, but it's still usually within your wheelhouse. Whereas like one of the first times I got to UCLA for the the MFA like orientation was like we showed up in their fabrication studio. Most of us, almost all of us, digital media artists, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to do a quick tutorial to get you lab certification, which means you're going to build this little toolbox. We're like, oh, we're going to do a little project, and they're like, yeah, and you're going to use probably every large saw in here and the nail guns, and the like dusters, and like all the industrial equipment, so you know how to use it. And it was like such a jump scare, but they were like, even if you never do fabrication work, you're going to learn how to do it because we have the resources here. And previous to that, I had always been a bit of like a magpie. I would go to a show, or I'd play a game, or I'd watch a movie. There's that meme that's like me walking out of a movie theater, my entire life and personality changing because of what I just saw. I'm a bit like that with work. I see something and I want to do it like that. So that means I explore a lot of mediums because I see a lot of work that's beautiful, and I want to know, well, how could I do that? So a lot of my work is, at least maybe not all the public work, but I do a lot of chameleon stuff where I just copy. I work in those same mediums, producing the same images, and I see what I like and what I don't like. I'm an avid follower of many tutorials and Patreons that explore mostly workflow. I think that's, I love looking at people's sketches. I love looking at people's processes. I learn a lot about how I make things through that. And I also think that what's really freeing about working in new mediums is I'm 25, so when I for example, draw. I have a big drawing background. I feel very comfortable in it. I've spent a long, part of my life doing it. To be 25 and good at what I've been doing for a long time feels good. To be 25 and bad at anything is frustrating because I feel like an adult who can't learn something. But when you're working in brand new mediums, you're kind of relieved from this need to be good at something. Kids explore stuff constantly because they just got here. And nobody is a specialist when they're 6 or when they're 10. But when you're older, it's a little harder to explore these new things because you feel like, well, I'm not as good as this as something else. So working in new mediums really forces me to expand my horizons. I refer to myself as an experimentalist. I like to study experimental things in experimental ways. But that is a personal practice that is greatly at odds with my personality. I don't enjoy being bad at things. I don't particularly love learning new things that are hard, but my work is usually better when I'm not doing the same thing. So it's very much a medium-based practice that emerges through my own concerns about being complacent with kind of some of the work that I do. And I've been really happy with, it's more fun to make work that is not married to its final result. But when you're working in mediums that you're really familiar with, you can plan those things out better. You can set up expectations in a way that can be really disappointing when you don't make them. But I have no background in things like stained glass. So if I produce a bunch of shitty stained glass, to me, I'm like, well, I've never done it before. So it's a great way to do something like that and then return to an existing practice and be like, I just had this really freeing moment where I made a bunch of garbage. I could do that here. So I try and make a lot of garbage, but I try to do it on purpose. It doesn't always work.
I think I just want to say that's a really beautiful sentiment, and I hope, if anything, that's giving some inspiration to my students in the chat, because anyone who's taken a course with me, we tend to do a new tool every other week if I'm feeling generous. And sometimes my students, who of course are all perfectionists and want to make beautiful, wonderful, amazing magnum opuses every week, it's hard to sort of get into that mindset of being willing to experiment and make productive garbage. But the way it can
one of my
practice is so exciting.
One of the at DM in the program I am now, you have to do like a first year presentation for the entire department. It lets them know just who you are if they weren't on the review committee, and mine was focused on my major goal after doing an MA and approaching an MFA was to become stupider faster. Because I think I spent so long with academics really trying to be, a smart person in the room that people listen to. A lot of my theory was focused on low theory and queer theory, so I was working in fields that were really critical of institutions of things like perfection, like Jack Halberstam, Sarah Ahmed, and still theorists whom I love and always refer back to. But I've become really attached to the idea of creating work that is not only bad, but also stupid. And sometimes I'll explain it and people will go, oh, you just mean work that's alternative. And I'm like, no, but you're calling it alternative and then that's making it seem better. I want it to be stupid. I want it to be ridiculous, and I want people to be annoyed by it. Or to the very least, I don't want to repurpose it in something that is trying to, be better than it is. I want to produce things that are bad because I enjoy doing that. And I love a lot of bad work, or a lot of controversial work, or work that is a guilty pleasure. So I get in some back and forth with some people I work with. They're like, oh, your work it's foolish, it's carefree. I'm like, no, it's stupid. Don't call it something foolish. I want it to be bad.
I love that there's a philosophy to this, even now.
Well, yeah, because part of the intricate trickery of that is that, of course, when you call something bad and stupid and you consider yourself among a group of artists, you may unfortunately be extending that to other people. This is more of a personal philosophy I have about just the word, pulled actually very strongly from Sarah Ahmed's kind of theory and the promise of happiness. A lot of her work is looking at how just the word happy cannot be taken out of a kind of capitalist, neoliberalist mindset. So she's a proponent for unhappiness, not alternative happiness. She says anytime you rely on happiness, you are measuring yourself up to these structures. So I've been thinking a lot about that in my own work, is if I say it's not bad, it's just a different kind of good. Well, I'm trying to relate it to these things. So by trying to, I guess, invoke stupidity and badness, I'm hoping to acknowledge that, there's a reason some of these aesthetics, some of these choices are not seen favorably. And I like that. And whether or not they are reframed as favorably by viewers, by other people, that's their business. I don't want to do that. Other people can do it. It doesn't bother me. It's more like when I make it, I want to think about not how I'm going to sell it in a grant, though that is a good deal of my life now.
Amazing. Yeah, there's so many directions with that. And I think you've kind of looped us back around to kind of a note that you made in the chat about, this kind of dichotomy between like creating and the theoretical justification, which we can talk about maybe more in the question period, because I think like my partner does a lot of experimental music composition, but he's also a philosopher. And what ends up happening a lot of the time, I think, is that you have to do twice as much work, and the philosophical or the theoretical component has to displace the artistic practice. Like it has to be the thing that's up front, and then the art like comes along behind after you've justified its existence. I would say, in answer to your question, like yes, you can do both, but usually you have to kind of flip them to make it work. But maybe we can get into that a little bit more as we're getting into questions. PB, do you think we should do one more question and then go to student questions, or just go straight there?
I think we should probably do one. I'm partial to the last one because...
Okay, go for it.
Yeah? Okay. Well, Elliot, this is a point of resonance for us, because we both enjoy quote-unquote bad games. And so this is something that already kind of come up, and you've already sort of qualified this a little bit, where, mentioning framing your work as stupid, not necessarily derogatory, but actually very like theoretically informed. Do you want to tell us, though, what you mean when you say bad games, and why it might be valuable for us as makers or scholars to think about play and bad games?
Yeah, I think when I say bad games, it's both theoretically informed and incredibly casual. So a lot of the games I was looking at were games that people offhand would just go, yeah, I mean, those games are kind of bad, though. And what they meant was just they didn't like it, or didn't work, or it looked weird. So when I talk about bad games, I'm kind of trying to marry those two ideas. There's a very base level, assumption of a bad game. When we talk about games and something is a bad game, we know what that means. And how I'm going to combine that with this sort of theoretical framing I've been thinking about, which is, doing things that are not good, that are avoiding phrases like good or goodness or happiness, and kind of what those can do for us in the way that we structure our lives, in the ways that we look at, opportunities, or how, a lot of my work is from my own lived experiences. So I'm a queer trans person of color. It's looking at what a bad life can really do for me, when oftentimes a good life isn't an option. And it's not so much about playing with the cards you've been dealt, but about thinking about what sort of contentment or joy can exist in badness that is just not structured in goodness because it's for other types of people. So, and when we say casually what's a bad game, we're not usually thinking of that high theory aspect. But I think that there is a through line. When games are bad, it's often like a mechanical failure, or it's an illustrative choice or a narrative problem. It could be that the game was more expensive than what you got for it. Or sometimes games are bad for political reasons. They engage in sort of bad faith arguments, or they're created by people who are very, not great. And I'm kind of interested in all of that. So for me, the bad game is both a simple thing. It's when you play a thing and you just don't think it was very good. Not that you didn't like it, that you thought it was bad. And it's trying to figure out, well, what is there to rescue from this bad game? If anything. I mean, sometimes a bad thing is just not for you. It's not worth it. But I've been trying to think about games that, I have a lot of games that I hate to love. I might call them bad. And yet there is something I think that works about them. And as a practitioner, some of it has to do with, what are bad aspects I might want to bring in to tell stories. I did a lot of work on pathologic, which sort of became really infamous for being really difficult and having this glitchy system that actually many reviewers would say adds to the sort of stress of the world, and the slowness and the issues that you're dealing with in a narrative context. But many of those were on purpose, and many of them weren't. So when I play a bad game and I don't like, what is something that I might think, that's really good to bring in to do on purpose. And then also thinking about what are all the things that didn't happen on purpose. Games, usually, for example, when games are racist, they're not racist on purpose. They're racist because whoever was designing it really just thinks like that. So there are also these unintentional quote unquote badnesses that arrive, that tell us about the world or about the people or about the company. And as a practitioner, there are going to be elements of my games that tell a lot more about me than I think that they should, or I think that they will. So it's something to think about as a maker and as a scholar, and also as a person who engages in media. What are the things that make it bad? Are they good reasons? Is it bad because you just don't like it, or is it bad because it fails in a mechanical sense, and that's what we consider really valuable, especially in AAA gaming? Is it bad because it actually, is getting ideas out there that you really disagree with? Or, for example, like loot crates and stuff? Is it promoting gambling in children? Like, there are a lot of different kinds of bads. Some I love and some I could do personally without. So I think it's worth kind of poking away at bad games in this academic sense that tends to be usually indie badness on purpose. And then bad games in a cultural sense, which can be anything from just a AAA game that's not really worth the money to an indie game that you feel was ripped apart by reviewers who didn't get it. There's sort of like this massive category of things that I think poking at will find more maybe micro categories or more articulate ways of talking about badness. And yeah, I find that valuable and interesting, and I guess sort of nebulous, which unfortunately as an academic is like anytime something is like confusing and new ground, you're like, well, that's where I plant my flag and get the job, which is not a great way to think about things. And if you're an undergrad, that's definitely not how you should think about it. But that was like, I was definitely like locked into this mindset for a few years.
Yeah. That's delightful. Thank you, Elliot. And I'll say just a couple of things before we throw this to student questions. First of all, you've no doubt made yourself very popular with the students in my class at the moment, because Pathologic is like one of their favorite games, and I think this does mark a
I'm
shift
gonna come
that
back.
I've noticed in teaching over the last like handful of years. Like there used to be a time where students would come in and they'd be like, oh yeah, we all play Genshin, or we all play, whatever's new and popular. And anyway, students now are like,
Yeah,
no,
now
I
the kids are
watch.
playing a 25-year-old Russian independent
Yes,
developed game.
exactly. It's pathologic, or like they're watching YouTubers who will go to itch or Steam and sort by most negative reviews and just start playing games, down that list. And anyway, I think that's wonderful. Um, Kenzie, you want to kick us off with the first student question?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. We will hold you fully responsible for this change. All right. We have several student questions on multiple channels. Everyone is dying to know, what are your like favorite bad games? What are your comfort bad games? And perhaps tell us a little bit like what about their badness calls to you?
I have become somewhat notorious in my program for trying to infect as many people as possible with the Fortnite bug. I play a lot of Fortnite. They got my ass because they had the Miku skin, which got me back. I had been on a Fortnite cleanse for a while. And unfortunately, a good friend of mine in the program, I really got him. I didn't realize he would be quite so addicted to it. But I've been playing a lot. I play for the past few weeks. I've been playing Fortnite like every night for a few hours. And I'm losing horribly. I'm not very good at it. But that's probably a big comfort game. And I feel like people working in game scholarship and stuff, they're like, we love games, we love AAA gaming. When you tell people you play Fortnite, they look at you like you're stupid. They're like, I mean, we love games, but like that's like not even like a good AAA game. It's not like it's really like capitalism, neoliberalism. Ow, don't swipe at me. It's a tough sell to people who do games work. But there's something about it that is really good. I think it moves well mechanically. For some reason, it is intentionally designed to get people with gambling addictions into this mindset. But it's a free game. It's one of the few free games that doesn't do like loot boxes, that doesn't have, pay to play kinds of things. It's fun to play with other people. It's been a great way, I think, to work with colleagues. It's kind of like football in the sense that when a lot of action is happening, you're always focused on what's going, but there's a lot of downtime where you're standing around collecting items, walking around, where you can catch up with people. So I have yet to like really produce a formal argument about Fortnite, but that's definitely, I guess, usually when I'm embarrassed to say I like something, that's the kind of bad game I personally like. And Fortnite is definitely one that, like, I'm aware when I tell people who work in games that I play it and I like it, they think less of me. But I do think it is fun. It's fun with groups. I'm a big fan.
I think that's often a productive space. We've seen a couple of waves of game scholarship, like Shira Chess and Chris Paul's work on like, hey, casual games are legit, like Kim Kardashian, whatever. Like this game is worth looking at, right? And I think you're right that like the more something makes us feel cringe, there's like, there's something there.
Dude, I'm rocking my Miku skin, and I think yesterday I lost 30 consecutive games. So I'm really in the dumps right now. I'm in a slump. I'm trying to get that mindset back in there. I'm trying to lock in.
Well, we're rooting for you. And I do think that it's actually a funny thing that happens in game studies where, especially within critical game studies, there's an aversion to talking about popular games, just like broadly speaking, because it's like, no, we're academics. Like, we need to come in here with the weirdest, quirkiest, like, most niche shit possible. But, like, there's tons of, like really like highbrow research on like Fortnite and addiction or children or monetization, but like we don't actually have like critical theory or like people who are sitting there being
Yeah,
like, you know, what is interesting about this? Even though, you know,
it's always on the psych side. It's on the
yeah,
EDI side of things.
right.
Yeah.
And like, you know, Fortnite is also where we had the frickin' like the MLK museum and like all of those weird, horrible crossover things that they did. Coachella Island in Fortnite. Anyway,
Yeah, Snoop Dogg dance, which was really the Crip Walk, but they didn't get into the politics of that.
right.
They should.
Yeah.
I mean, whoever's on, I think I'm also fascinated with their ability to be so tightly bound to popular culture. I mean, I think it's a reason why people don't like to talk about the game in a theory sense, because it does seem like very like, I mean, it's very like what everybody wants. It's very MCU, like do whatever makes the box office happy. But I'm one of those people, and I enjoyed having the Miku skin.
Yeah. Well, man, we have a bunch of questions pouring in now, so I'll just jump in there to say critical Fortnite studies, get on board. And as a reminder,
Me and
y'all
David,
feel
yeah.
free to react in the sidebar or the chat to upvote questions that you also share. I think we'll probably kick this off with a question from. There's a two-part question. I think we'll start with the first part, which is when justification is required to produce an artwork, I feel like that conflicts with your goal of making stupid. I'm curious how you reconcile that requirement.
The genuine answer is that I probably don't. I can be extremely hypocritical in many aspects.
Yeah.
Very early on in my PhD, I discovered the phrase on Twitter, which is Schrodinger's author. So you'll hear sometimes the death of the author in casual sense, and then in English or audience studies, it comes up with this idea of, you know, is what the author thinks and who they are important to the story. So death of the author is like, you know, or Schrodinger's author is, the author is important if and only if I agree with them. And I find that that's true in and listen, that gets laughs when I say it, but everybody thinks that way. Charlie, don't bite me. Charlie,
No, you're
don't
not
bite me.
wrong.
Ow. But I find that that's also true in the way I approach work. Sometimes I am very frustrated by the limitations I ground myself. He's trying to knock over a whole glass of water. Stop! Get out of here. I gotta use this wadded up sweater, otherwise he'll bite me. People who don't know, I recently adopted a stray, and he's a little unpredictable. He's freaking out, chasing his own tail in the corner. But I find that I sometimes I approach work with kind of these values, and I find that helpful, and when I don't find them helpful, I don't use it. There's no other way to say it other than I sometimes I will even pitch a work to other people about stupidity that maybe I didn't make with that mindset, but I'm trying to get money from a grant. So I lie, and I'm a hypocrite about some things, and I feel like that's fine. It's within. I couch that within the realm of experimentation, and the joke I always have for other people is that anytime I do something that is in direct disagreement with stuff I've said before, I just say, well, I'm queering it. I'm queering artistry by lying and not not having a super set thing of values. So that is, I think, it's a genuine answer. I think sometimes really wanting to produce work that is experimental can be a huge blockade in your ability to do that. So these are guiding values that guide me when it works, and when it doesn't, I don't use them.
Yeah. I think that's great. I will also just state for the record, for those of you who have yet to apply for grants, it's okay if your entire frame of values goes out the window for a minute so you can write that grant application.
About the
If you've
money.
seen me in the classroom, I'm like, representation doesn't matter. Like, we make art for ourselves. Like, fuck audiences. We don't care. The moment I sit down to write a grant, this is why this is the most important thing in the world, and everyone will care about this. It's part of the
I know
game,
I have all these
unfortunately.
opinions about, identity and like how I want to be viewed. When I sit down and write a little scholarship, I go, as a queer transgender person of color, I deserve this money more than other people.
Genuinely. Get the
I mean,
money.
it's the grant sphere is
You know,
it's very severance, which is bad, but you're typically writing it for people who will never care about what you do and might not even know what grants they approved. It's just a totally different mindset.
Yep. I've had students often ask me, because I have a number of non-binary students, you're applying for a scholarship, and that scholarship is like only for women and or like gender minorities or whatever, and they come to me and they're like, what do I do? I'm like, on your gender is get that bag. Like, that's
I just had
writing
a friend
101.
non-binary doll. She was like, I just got asked to teach this thing for like girls who code, but like I really don't think of myself as a girl. And I was like, well, do you think of yourself as being poor? She did it, and she had a lot of fun. The kids had a lot of fun. But yeah, it's definitely like, there's if you're a marginalized person, there's already so much stacked against you. Start lying.
Listen,
I mean, they made the boxes. You're just there to figure out which one to sit in.
right. Perfect. I'm so sorry I side railed us. Kenzie, do you want to pick next question?
Sure. Yes, there are many good questions, but I'm gonna go maybe because we're kind of talking about this, like how do you orient yourself? There's a question from, I assume their real name. Are there any rules you always follow regarding creating bad games? Do you see a pattern? And they refer a little bit to the connection you already identified about like popular culture and happiness. So yeah, what are your rules for bad games? Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what I said before is sometimes I have very concrete rules and they get me very far, and sometimes I don't. I think at my base level, I try to do things that I enjoy. So oftentimes, a lot of my projects come from, well, I've seen something recently or I played something recently. I would love to do something that invokes what that invoked for me. I recently played a very cool, made on Ren'P, like a kind of point and click, more novel called Man, I Want to Go Home, or I Just Want to Go Home. And I played that and I was like, I want to do that. So that's a little bit what I've been working on recently, is something like that. So, I think a lot of the patterns that emerge are, I try and make a lot of work that I would like to view. Oftentimes I try to make more work that I enjoy making, and then the final product I don't care much for, which is a little tricky. I mentioned Sarah Ahmed before, I'll mention it again. The Promise of Happiness really kind of lays out this idea of, what it means to be happy or work towards a happy life. And I took that really strongly about the things that I do, and, not only trying to be and live contently in a way that is radical as a person of color, as a queer person, to do things that make me happy in my day to day because there is so much unhappiness I can't control. But also what she's saying about when we strive for happiness as a thing that is maybe not good. Last year, I had one of the best years of my life, and I also had one of the worst years of my life, for many complicated political and personal reasons. But the things that made it really good were that really bad things had happened and I developed really close friendships with people. And the things that made it really bad were these really close friendships kind of crumbled away when other stuff happened. So there was this goodness that was only possible because there was a heavy amount of badness. So I think I try to work towards happiness, but I also think that, my life is made richer by frustration and anger, some of which I feel very strongly about. I'm angry about the current conditions of the world. I'm angry about, kind of cracking down on anti-Palestinian stuff in the US, on anti-trans stuff in the US. I'm angry about racism, about a lot of things. And I don't want to put that anger away in pursuit of happiness, or put those bad experiences away in pursuit of happiness. I feel that I'm only really content when I have, many components of this going on. So when it comes to actually like making work, sometimes I really sit down and I love working in Blender, so I'm going to be making stuff in Blender. And I hate working in Unity. But there's something really satisfying about working with something that you don't like, about getting the thing that you need, or potentially the new project that has to emerge because of coding limitations on the developer side, which is usually, past 3 quarters, I've produced a lot of walking simulators, and everybody knows it's because I'm really struggling to program more than a basic FPS controller. But so there's this frustration that I enjoy. Maybe it doesn't make me happy, but I enjoy it. There's also contentness in, doing things I like, and I work a lot in Godot and Blender and Twine, and those are programs I like and I understand. So sometimes working in them is very satisfying. And working in things like Unity or Maya is very frustrating. But I still do it. I still get something out of it. I don't know, it's good. It's something.
Yeah. I think, because we're coming up to the end of our time, I'm going to ask you one of the rapid fire questions, which is, what's your favorite new medium that you've experimented with? And or what's the weirdest and most outlandish?
I've recently got really into making puppets.
Like physical puppets?
Like physical, like Jim Henson puppets. I'm
Awesome.
It's become I did a little textile stuff and like fabric sewing in my younger years. So this has been in some ways a return to that, and also just kind of like something new construction. Some folks I work with I'm trying to find pictures while I talk, but some folks I work with at the UCLA Game Lab also got bit with the puppet bug. And I like let it slip that I had worked on something like that in the past. And then they were like, well, let's just make a bunch of puppets then. And that's kind of what we had been doing for like the past few weeks. We've done a lot of puppet stuff. But I enjoy working in it. I think it's a lot of fun. Here, there's me with my puppet.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's Miss Fish. But yeah, so I took kind of a quick dive. We just had our first year reviews where I was talking to a bunch of faculty members, and they're like, well, what have you done in your first year here? And I was like, I've really made 0 games, but 8 puppets. So, I enjoyed doing it though. Then they asked like, well, okay, well, how does this contribute to your practice? I'm like, I don't know.
So,
But
not to put you on the spot,
yeah.
Elliot, but can we bring you up next year to run a workshop, and we'll get a bunch of makeys, and we can have
Puppet
like
Jam.
a puppet-based, like, make a puppet alternate controller game in a week jam, something in that vein, so you can.
Dude, I churned out Miss Fish over here in probably a week or less.
Okay.
DMA had a puppet jam, I think a few years ago, that was about like alternative puppets. So I'm sure many people would be on board with doing puppet stuff. I've also, one of the weird things I picked up from working in games is I call everything a jam. I like went out to get hot pot with some people, and I'm like, we should do a little hot pot jam, which is just us having tea.
Yeah.
So So I've just really adopted that into like the way that I speak.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy to reiterate, everything you do can be a jam, and if any of my students make a puppet for their final portfolio in my class, automatic A, I don't make the rules. That's fantastic. Well, we have 2 minutes left. Do we want to squeeze in one more question? I don't want to put us on the spot. Let's see if we have a short one.
Yeah, I'm trying to look back through and see if there's any that are quickies and not
I was gonna say
deep.
a lot of these are great questions, but I wouldn't want to be like answer this in a minute or less.
I mean, I'm always around too. You can share my Discord info or my email if folks want to ask me questions.
Thanks, Elliot.
I add that to my grant. I consult with many students, both in the U.S. and abroad.
Yeah, exactly.
You're adding to my ability to get a $300 payback on a plane ticket.
Yeah, perfect.
Bigger than Malta this year. Okay, it's $15,000 or $1,500 plane ticket to Europe. God damn.
Oh man, I have many thoughts about this. I feel all that. Well, tell you what, we will call it there, and we're gonna bring the session to a close, and I'm gonna do a little sign off for the recording side of things, just to say thank you all so much who came out here live. We hope you enjoyed getting to chat with Elliot if you were watching the recording. Sorry we missed you, but I hope this was fun and enlightening. And something we love to do, Elliot, is invite our speaker to end the video with their favorite sign-off. So if you have a like, comment, and subscribe, or favorite Elliot Yu inspired sign off, now's the time to dazzle us. This will be the end of the video. I could have warned you in advance, but we didn't do that last season, so we're not doing it this season.
I'll do the YouTuber classic.
Okay.
Like, okay, I'll see you guys next time.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
And then cut.